Welcome, everybody. This is a vital psychedelic conversation. I'm David Drapkin, the Director of Education and Training at Psychedelics Today. And we've got two wonderful people connected to our vital community, Sam Gandy, one of our instructors in Vital, and Paloma David, one of our graduates from Vital. And yeah, we're talking about something that is really interesting that I don't know much about, but luckily Sam and Paloma do. The title is Ayahuasca Chronicles, exploring Amazonian traditions and nature connectedness. So Sam and Paloma, good to see you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, good to be part of this discussion.
Yeah, thank you. It was a bit last minute, us pulling this together and just felt like, yeah, there was something drawing this subject here and both of you here as well. So super duper happy we're doing this. Before we jump into the actual kind of content and discussion, we do have a Q&A box as well. So we will be doing Q&A because we've put aside an hour and a half for this conversation. So if you've got a question, just pop it in the Q&A box and then we'll get to that once kind of we go through a bit of the discussion that the three of us are having. Sam and Paloma both have some slides that'll be really awesome that each of them are built independently. And then once we've kind of gone through slides and a bit more discussion, then we are going to Q&A away. So feel free to pop them in the Q&A box now or whenever they pop into your head so that we can hit that once we're done. And I guess the only thing I really want to tell folks about is, what is Vital? Because we announced yesterday that we're extending the application deadline of our 12-month course Vital to January the 14th.
Recording.
We're back now. That was just a little break. Sam pushed a button.
The chat. Sorry about that.
All good. Just testing it. Yeah.
Just keeping you on your toes.
The pause button works. All good. See, I was just saying Vital is our course that starts January 23rd. And we honestly just feel like it's a super important gift for the world to share together, and that we are sharing it as part of the community, and we're in it together. And we wanted to really open it up to more people to join for this year. So we said, okay, let's extend the deadline to January the 14th. So if anyone wants to join, I'll put that in the chat box as well, vitalpsychedelictraining.com. And I think to get the ball rolling, Paloma, I'd love to just ask you, you were in the very first cohort of Vital, and Sam, you were the first teacher in that first cohort. But Paloma, for you, like what were some of your main takeaways from being in Vital and looking back on it? How do you think Vital has influenced and helped you in kind of what you've done next?
Yeah, I think Vital was kind of the perfect bridge between my master's degree and my PhD program. I knew I wanted to work in psychedelics. I knew it was an emerging field, and I knew I wanted to be part of the movement. So Vital was the perfect program for me to get to know top-notch researchers and scientists who had all different perspectives on the field. And yeah, it enriched my own perspectives as well. And I got to be trained in how to facilitate these states in a meaningful, safe way as well. So I am in gratitude with Vital and with the people I got to meet and with you, David. So yeah, I only have amazing memories from my time there. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, and we've got a nice story about how you found your way to Vital as well through Psychedelic Grad, the little community
Indeed. Yeah.
chat. That was awesome.
Yeah.
I forgot to read your bio, so I'm going to be honest because it seems like I'm doing honesty right now. So I'm going to tell folks who you are right now. So Sam Gandy is a PhD ecologist and independent researcher. His varied experience of working within the psychedelic field, including as a past scientific assistant to the director of the Beckley Foundation and as a research assistant with the Synthesis Institute. His work has also involved science communication, including a past role as a senior science writer for WavePaths, and he delivers talks in association with Seed Talks and occasional fungi cultivation workshops. He's a lifelong nature lover. He has a research interest in the capacity of psychedelics to influence human relationships with nature, and is a collaborator with the Centre for Psychedelic Research at Imperial College London and at Onaya Science. His main work focus is within the ecological field, focusing on nature recovery, working as the innovation team leader for environmental consultancy EcoSulis. Sam is deeply passionate about both the restoration of nature and the restoration of human connection to it, which we're going to be hearing a lot about today. And really interesting breaking news from today was that Atai Sciences just invested $50 million, I think, in Beckley Sciences. So that's kind of breaking news from today, just for everyone to know about.
Yeah, Beckley
Paloma.
Science, I think.
Yeah, great having you, Sam. Thanks, mate. Paloma David was born in Bogotá, Colombia, and while pursuing her bachelor's in cultural anthropology at the National University of Colombia, she encountered the perplexing ayahuasca tradition in her own home country. Marveled by the effects of the brew on human consciousness, she decided to continue studying ayahuasca by pursuing a research master's in religious studies at the University of Amsterdam. She's conducted fieldwork research on the contemporary uses of the brew in rainforests, capital cities, and digital settings. Her interests include psychedelic research, the promising therapeutic use of these substances, and their current use in Europe and Latin America. Paloma is currently a Ph.D. student at Radboud University, where she researches the shifting perceptions of ayahuasca in Latin America. So welcome, Paloma. And how did I do with pronouncing that university? Radboud?
It's Radboud, yeah, but you did great. No worries.
Radboud. Okay, that's better. All right, so here we are. And yeah, I wanted to just get the ball rolling by asking a question to you both. Looking back on your own experiences in life so far, why do you think you both were particularly drawn towards specializing to some extent in the field of ayahuasca and nature relatedness, nature itself, and that aspect of where psychedelics comes into it? Why that in particular? Any aspects of your personality, your life story, your experiences? Yeah.
Well, yeah, just quickly, I think in my case, I've always had the love of and interest in nature there. That's kind of always been there, really, and I think always will be. But yeah, when I started my undergraduate university career, psilocybin in mushroom form in particular was legal. In London, you could buy it on the high street, which is what I did. And that kind of then, I guess, put me on a different path that eventually then led to being part of a symposium at Breaking Convention, the conference that's held in the UK every few years. And David Luke, who's a friend, colleague, collaborator, he gave a talk. Actually, I gave my own talk, and he gave one looking at how psychedelics can potentially influence people's connection to or concern for nature. And that was a little bit of a light bulb moment for me, because I wasn't aware of any work being done at that kind of interface, and that's probably because none had until that point. And yeah, it was obviously because I had the interest in nature and the interest of psychedelics. It just made very great sense to me to be wanting to working at the intersection of where those two Venn diagrams overlap. So that was, I guess, my kind of on-ramp to being involved in this field. Beautiful. And yeah, just excited about the possibility of exploring tools, agents, practices, interventions that can potentially remedy our growing disconnect and alienation from nature. The effects of psychedelics are certainly not, I would say, guaranteed when it comes to this, but given the implications of and scale of our disconnect from nature, any and all avenues open to us, I feel, are worthy of exploration, and would be foolish to sort of not do so.
Well said. Thank you. Yeah, the word potential, we still have to use that. I'm looking forward to when we can kind of extract that word potential. And but yeah, there's a lot of nuances here, and yeah, I think it's great to say, yeah, we are kind of desperate, I think, as a species, for something to help us change and learn and evolve in a more deep and wise way. And I think, yeah, psychedelics probably are in our top 1 or 2 or 3 options. I'm not sure what else there is. Mindfulness and meditation's definitely good. Bit of yoga in the morning, but yeah, I think psychedelics goes right to the source. Yeah, Paloma, how about for you? Looking back, what do you think some of the reasons for you becoming who you are and interested in these areas happened?
Yeah, I think just drinking ayahuasca back in Colombia really changed my perspective from being ego-centered in my own self all the time into being able to connect with my environment. And it all started with paying attention to music and to sounds and to the surrounding environment of ayahuasca ceremonies, that little by little, in that sort of small ego dissolution that happens with ayahuasca, I start to notice that I'm actually not alone in the universe, and I'm not the only one who exists, but rather we are all here together, kind of connected in our all existential journey of being alive in the world. And it started little by little changing my perspective from overly focusing in my own self and being able to focus on others and others' perspectives and to my surrounding environment. And I think those changes in humans is something that we need right now as a species, to stop focusing so much in ourselves as a species, but notice that we're surrounded by, this might sound as a platitude, but it's the truth. We're surrounded by earthlings, by trees, by animals, by fungi, we live in a vast interconnected web of existence, and that's important, because that disconnection is, in my opinion, directly responsible for our outlook in life, of exploiting others, of exploiting nature, and not really perceiving that in nature there is also sentience and there is also agency. So I think psychedelics can help sort of reshift our perspectives on our species and our place in the world.
Beautiful. Well, you dive straight into the topic there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe, I guess, can we philosophize a bit on how and why we ended up the way we are in the year 2024? Or, for me, it's the year 5784. Why is it, that humanity evolved in this way? What was it meant to be like this? And also, when did it become like this? When did our destiny change, and why? And what was maybe before the inflection point, without romanticizing it? What were humans' relationships like with nature, like as a part of it? Like, weren't we always kind of ushered against them, or like, I just want to get a feel for it without romanticizing it. Like, what was it like looking back centuries or millennia from what we know or think we know?
Well, I mean, it's a good question to ask, because we can't romanticize our like hunter-gathering Paleolithic kind of ancestors too much, because life expectancy was much shorter. Your chances, we were literally getting preyed on, let alone, life was a lot tougher. It was very much more sustainable than it is now, but we didn't have like a lot of the material comforts, technology, protection. We've certainly, there's no denying, as much as one might point to some of the ills and some of the issues with modern society, modern civilization, of which there are many, there's no doubt, it has also borne us many fruits. So we have to kind of like have that sort of in mind, like it's positive and negative. And then if we go back, there were positive and negative sides about living with the planet in that way. We were much more vulnerable. We were much more at risk. We were never going to become the kind of like planet dominating species that we've become without severing some of our connection to nature and bending it to our whims, to suit it, and engineer it to our purposes. There's simply no way we'd have got into space or split the atom or it rendered smallpox extinct. Like, I know that there's issues with all of those, like I know the splitting the atom thing, that's a whole nuanced topic on its own. But yeah, it's that growing disconnect from nature has in some sense been part of our materialistic technological development and progress as a species. But very briefly, in terms of how we got here, I think once we shifted from being kind of hunter-gatherers to farmers, essentially, that was one of the first steps of disconnection that happened, because nature became then more of a resource and something to extract, and you'd kind of want to look after your livestock or your crop and basically expel any other species that would in any way infringe upon your crop. So we started to judge and assess nature in a different way, as a more kind of extractive resource. And unfortunately, sort of going on from that, I mean, it's been happening over a long time, but at different points through different levers, if you will. And never important thing like religion, particularly the Abrahamic religions, more so. I feel they've had a bit of they've sown seeds of disconnect. I mean, the Bible does kind of lay it out pretty clearly in the book of Genesis that all life was created by, we're God's chosen children. We were created in God's image, and then all other species are merely things, resources, playthings for us, God's chosen children. And that's not a mentally healthy view, in terms of living as part of an interconnected web of life. It's like, no, we are top of the pyramid. We are number one. And that I feel has, again, sort of like the psychology of that's maybe allowed us to sort of advance in terms of achievements in certain directions. But I also feel like, yeah, we're not apart from nature, we're a part of nature. And I feel like, yeah, that sort of mindset that kind of severs our connection to nature is a dangerous, bad lie. Basically, unfortunately, some of like the early roots of the scientific method had its kind of roots in theology. So a guy René Descartes came along with his concept of dualism, and that was very much inspired by theology. And once again, humans were placed on the pedestal of being amazing and separate and brilliant. So we're the only beings to possess soul or consciousness. All other beings, even if they seem to be expressing signs of consciousness or sentience, it's all a mirage. They're biological machines acting to stimuli. Only humans are special. Again, we can do what we damn well want to nature because it's an unfeeling, unliving, weirdly, resource for us to use. So yeah, Descartes' dualistic views, which had their roots in theology that came before it, aligned very well with our kind of colonial, extractive way of viewing and running the world, essentially. And now more recently, I would say within the last century, half century, the advent of technology, smartphones, internet, games, television, and also general biodiversity loss, increasing urbanization, so a growing extinction of experience or a diminished capacity for those everyday interactions with nature and experiences that make up our connection to it. Like, that's also being lost and eroded. So this is like a deeply problematic, deeply entrenched problem that's coming from multiple angles, and we need to be aware of that, because I don't feel there's not a single solution to this problem. Psychedelics might be able to help address it, but on their own, I don't believe they have the power, because it's too much.
Right. That was a really nuanced and comprehensive answer, Sam. Thank you. Yeah. How about for you, Sam? Paloma, what's coming up for you? And just generally speaking around some of these questions.
Yeah, I agree with Sam. I was also thinking about the theologically rooted origins of our disconnection. And again, the myth of Genesis sort of implied that humans must dominate over nature, and that's there for us. And then I also want to add that the idea of dominating over others is also there in patriarchy. The idea that one can and should exert dominance over others, over nature and over other sentient beings is also there, very much rooted. So I think there are other ways of relating with the natural world that didn't undergo the historical processes that we just outlined. And Amazonian peoples in the Amazon rainforest have different ways of relating with the earth, also in their own nuanced and not so romantic ways, but there are other ontological and epistemological ways of relating with nature that we can learn as a global society to sort of apply in the times of environmental crisis. So I think we have still a lot to learn, and there's a long way to go for us as a species still.
Thank you, Paloma. And yeah, those two words that I have learned since I've been kind of part of the psychedelic circus, ontological and epistemological, often comes from the perspective of undergoing and experiencing a shock in ontologically and epistemologically speaking. And I personally have experienced that through psychedelics and through other kind of near-death experiences. And I think, yeah, maybe that's one of the potentials of psychedelics, is to have that, in a sense, being able to step outside of oneself. And it might be that, yes, we can see nature there and that we're part of it, and the universe and that part of it, and that maybe our ego is also not quite as truthful or comprehensive or complete or secure as we once thought it was, kind of being trapped in that prison. So I think the whole concept of ego death, I think probably plays a really big role when we think about how our society has evolved, over centuries. Our ego and literally our brain has changed how it is wired, and the way, society is. How, Sam, what you were talking about, definitely with technology and media and our kind of lifestyle. Like, I spend 8 hours a day looking at my laptop. I try and get out and like do Zoom calls on my phone for an hour every day. But, I don't think I was made to do that. But for some reason, I'm bloody doing it. I love what I do. So, I think, so psychedelics, I think definitely that ontological, epistemological shock. Before we jump into the slides, I just want both of you just to say, maybe just in a brief way, what for you presents the unique potentiality of psychedelics to help move humanity in a positive direction in regards to what we're talking about here with the path that we have gone down over the last few decades and hundreds of years. Why do you feel like psychedelics work in the way that they do, and what is it about how they work on humans on an individual and or collective level that gives you hope for the future?
Well, yeah, just quickly, I think, like, as we've already touched on with the environmental crisis / crises, as well as that stuff going on, biodiversity loss, climate change, pollution, and other things, like, we're also experiencing a global mental health crisis as well, that may be part of that, but there's not a complete overlap there. But where I think things do overlap is that it's basically chronic disconnection, psychological disconnect, that's lying at the root of these crises, the environmental and mental health crisis. And I'm talking now not just about connection to nature, although that's definitely a big part of it, but connection to self, connection to other people, to your friends, family, community, tribe, if you will, and community to your ecosystems, and the wider biosphere. And I feel like, our society, for all its all its advancement, all its achievements, all of its fruits, baked into the value structure of our Western civilization is essentially chronic disconnect. We've got values such as materialism, fierce competition, consumerism and anthropocentrism. Again, humans being on the kind of like center pedestal, and all of those sort of values or perspectives, I would consider all of them as inversely related to connecting and connection. And that's really a shame, because we humans we're fundamentally wired for our connection. It's truly our gold, much more so than actual gold. Our real gold is that connection. And what excites me and gives me hope about psychedelics is I view them as catalysts of connection. They are in some sense an antidote, maybe only partial antidote, but they push back, or can at least for a time, against this disconnect. So, but I feel like, knowing that, we definitely need to find out more about how to use them better in this capacity as catalyst connections. So for instance, like the clinical approach is about it's an individualized approach, because that reflects our individualized society. Of course, we treat people one-on-one, but what about the potential of doing group ceremonies, more how indigenous groups use these things, where they're much more embedded in the community and in nature-based contexts as well. So I hope that we kind of, some people really know their stuff about using these plants and fungi. They've been using them for centuries, and I feel like there's important insights and wisdom to be learned there. So yeah, I guess that sort of wasn't actually that short, was it? But I'll shut up now.
That wasn't bad. Thanks. That was medium size. Thanks, Sam. That was beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree 100% with Sam. I think the idea of using it to take humanity in the right direction we should always be careful with how we phrase things, because there are also pitfalls in there. We need to build community in a healthy way, avoid psychedelic narcissism, avoid harmful ideologies, and I think psychedelics can help us in a way to go inside and help us heal some of our disconnection wounds. And at the same time, we need to be very sober about them, be very critical about them, and try to find other tools that can also help us. Because what we're talking about is systemic change. We're talking about here something that's very systemic. It cannot be done on an individual basis, as in me as an individual have a big insight about how I'm connected to the tree, and that's really beautiful. But in reality, we need to go a little bit deeper and think about our relation to the earth as a society, but also historical relations between the global north and the global south, extractivist relationships between different countries. And I think the Amazon rainforest sort of embodies those conflicts of interests. How can we relate to other cultures, to indigenous cultures, as our equals? How can we relate to ayahuasca as something not to be extracted and appropriated for our own means and goals, but something that can help us build a more reciprocal relationship with indigenous people in the Amazon rainforest? Because there are also colonial wounds in there about extracting and appropriating things and then using it for our purposes. So we can go and use psychedelics and use ayahuasca to enter sort of a right relationship with each other, and try to go in and address some of the historical wounds that are there between us. And it's a long road. I think we have inherited a lot of things as a generation. And we can only take small and humble steps towards a different future.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I really like how you're including the word inheritance in that. Yeah, what we've inherited and what we kind of giving birth for the future. All right, so it's time for slides. Everybody loves some slides. So thankfully, Sam and Paloma both have some prepared. Sam, I think we said it made sense for you to Yeah, share yours first. I don't know. Do you have any videos or sound music playing in yours, Sam? No?
No,
Okay.
it's just a few slides. Yeah, so I thought with my slides, essentially, I'm just giving a bit of a broad overview of the research that's been conducted so far, linking how ayahuasca can potentially shift people's relationships, perspectives, connection to and with nature. So just let me bring that
Yeah, and
up.
just while Sam's getting that ready, folks, if you want to drop any Q&As in the Q&A box, pop them in there. And then once, I think we're out of the slide mode, we'll go into Q&A mode.
Cool. So I thought, it might, just before I go further into some of the work that's been done, I thought it's important to define nature connectedness or nature relatedness, actually. Like the bulk of psychedelic and ayahuasca research has been using nature relatedness scales, and they're essentially the same thing, as you can probably imagine, get from the name, and they're trying to essentially capture aspects of an individual's relationship with nature, which is kind of quite complex and multifaceted. And it's being defined as a sustained awareness of the interrelatedness between oneself and the rest of nature, or as an individual's experiential sense of oneness with the natural world. So it's tied to the awareness that you're part of a larger community of nature or a larger interconnected web of life, and then the kind of like feelings that and emotions that sort of are part of that. So just to touch on, who cares? Like why care about people's connection to nature? Like, why is it a worthwhile topic? And well, I mean, to put it very simply, actually, it's good for you and feels good to connect with nature. If you want it in a sort of like small nutshell, there's a growing body of evidence now to show that nature connectedness has a particular association for a form of well-being called eudaimonic well-being. So eudaimonic well-being is tied to living a life of meaning, vitality, self-actualization, things like that, compared to, say, hedonic well-being, which is more about feeling good and seeking pleasure over pain. It's like a higher level form of well-being in a sense. And there's a number of studies that sort of show this connection, and this sort of figure here is taken from one study published a few years ago that was quite compelling, because they looked at people's nature connectedness, but also their socioeconomic status, which tends to be a fairly reliable predictor of various aspects of health and well-being. They also looked at nature documentary TV viewing, nature visits, so visits to kind of local green space, but then actually living by local green space as well. And what was quite sort of interesting about this study was that their data found that people's nature connectedness levels had 4 times the power of their socioeconomic status at predicting people living a meaningful life, of having meaning, vitality, self-actualization, and personal growth, things like that as part of their life. So that in it, on its own is quite a kind of compelling finding. But there has been a number of other studies that have found that nature connectedness is linked to a number of happiness indicators as well. So one study in particular found a similar effect size for nature connectedness, predicting happiness, as things like income and education level, which again tend to be fairly reliable sort of predicting factors of various aspects of well-being and health. Nature connectedness also aids in emotional regulation. So it's been described as, providing a reserve of calm. People who rate lower in nature connectedness have more difficulty regulating their emotions. And yeah, nature connectedness has also been tied to psychological resilience and lower anxiety levels. So yeah, it's quite an important aspect of health and well-being. So this is really just kind of, I'm just summarizing here some of what the literature has reported with regard to how ayahuasca can affect people's relationships or perspectives with regard to nature. There is a paper in review that references all these different things that I'm working on with Simon Ruffle, that hopefully will be published in coming months. So if people want to delve into the literature here, that will be feasible. Hopefully before too long. So things such as changes in perspectives on nature and changes on relationships as well. So the generation of more respectful relationships has been reported in some of the qualitative literature. And greater sensitivity towards nature, and also greater confidence and feelings of safety. This actually really quite interests me, because I'm wanting next to maybe research, if I can, how psychedelics might interact with biophobia, or the fear of nature, which is a big and growing barrier to connecting with it. And this finding here sort of suggests that, yeah, psychedelic like ayahuasca might be able to sort of help with this. Another interesting finding published in a recent paper by Perkins et al. Was that, yeah, people who have been undertaking ayahuasca sessions report spending more time in nature following usage. And it's good to see more research on this. I think this is like, I think we need more work to kind of look at how psychedelics might change people's nature-centric kind of lifestyle stuff, or time spent in nature, because there's such a good body of research now to show how important time in nature is for health and well-being. So if psychedelics can influence the degree to which people spend time in nature and adopt nature-centric lifestyles, I mean, that potentially has a huge implications for people's health and well-being across the lifespan. But until now, it's not really had that much kind of attention. People have also reported having more nature-oriented interests and hobbies as a result of ayahuasca use. You know, some people might take up gardening. And yeah, the generation of pro-environmental awareness, attitudes and behaviors. So the paper I mentioned that talked about more time being spent in nature by ayahuasca users, that also found that people who were engaging with ayahuasca ceremonies were also reporting more pro-nature activities, behaviors, joining like community volunteer groups and stuff. And that's great to see, because, you know, there is quite a lot of talk about the sort of pro-environmental behavior changing capacity of psychedelics and ayahuasca, but we definitely need more work. We need to measure pro-environmental behavior change much better than relying on self-report scales. And now, just kind of like something to put out that we can maybe come back to in the discussion, but I'm aware of an anthropologist who works in the Amazon with ayahuasca and indigenous groups there. And he told me an interesting tale, which kind of slightly puts a whole dampener on the, ayahuasca will make us all nature loving people, so, and we'll live happily ever after type of kind of vantage, in that he said that some indigenous society members that he was aware of, who were, you know, full-blood indigenous, Amazonian, deep knowledge and reverence and connection to the plant community there, but when the sort of possibility came of earning some moolah, had no qualms about, like, yeah, destroying a sort of tract of forest, to kind of like, yeah, to sort of like potentially exploit the niche of ayahuasca tourism. And I feel like that was a bit of a slight sort of like wake-up call, in the sense that this wasn't just like some Westerner going out there taking their Western values with them. This is like an indigenous Amazonian who arguably you know, it's among the more nature connected people on earth, the indigenous groups we've had. And it's like, even the indigenous groups, ayahuasca or not, can and will sometimes be seduced by the almighty dollar and Western ideals of you know, like success. And so it's sort of, we just need to bear in mind that ayahuasca is in no way a fully dependable ecological salvation, and it would be misguided and naive for us to view it in that way, whatever its potential might be. I'm not going to talk about this much because I think Paloma's going to sort of have a deeper dive here, but this is kind of came as a result of a collaborative paper with some colleagues, and this was looking at the mediators of change. So what's actually underpinning people's changes in relationships. It's all very well showing people's nature connectedness levels of change pre and post psychedelic, but that doesn't tell you anything about why or how. So this study was really interesting because it was a qualitative study, and we got to shed light on all the different mechanisms under the surface at play that people attributed to having shifted their relationship or perspective on nature. And as I say, I'm not going to unpack it too much beyond saying that experiences of interconnectedness with nature under the psychedelic were by far the kind of most primary mechanism at play. Although I've just kind of, I have just sort of like gave an example of where, you know, indigenous ayahuasca usage is not necessarily a barrier to ecological destruction in an Amazonian context. It definitely does go the other way as well. And there is some interesting ethnographic and anthropological work looking at how different indigenous groups in the Amazon potentially use ayahuasca as an ecological mediating agent, or like a biosphere nature connecting agent, if you will. Bearing in mind that the indigenous groups that use ayahuasca in the Amazon, they're doing it in quite a different manner to how, say, you know, medics and clinicians treat psychedelics, in that it's much more embedded in the community, and it's a kind of tends to be a much more earthy, nature-oriented kind of context around usage as well. So some early kind of research, there's been very little research really looking specifically at nature relatedness and ayahuasca, but one sort of interesting finding was that ayahuasca users tend to rate more highly in a personality trait called self-transcendence. And so self-transcendence is related to openness to experience, one of the big five kind of areas of personality, and it was concocted to try and capture spiritual views and feelings. So trying to add a spiritual dimension to personality, and self-transcendence is kind of tied to, I guess, feelings or perspectives underpinned by feelings that your sense of self is expanding or emerging to take in a greater, more comprehensive whole. These experiences, or this kind of trait of self-transcendence, has been associated with both nature relatedness and environmental concern. Other research has found, like, there's been a fair few studies actually that have found the link between ayahuasca use and mindfulness related capacities. And that's interesting because mindfulness and nature relatedness have a kind of positively reciprocating relationship. There's much more to nature connectedness or relatedness than mindfulness alone, but the foundation of nature relatedness really is active and engaged sensory contact with the natural world. And you're naturally inclined to be in such a state if you're in a mindful state in nature, and nature actually tends to nudge us more towards being in an effortless mindful state than other contexts. And in particular, one mechanism that ayahuasca has been linked to is decentering. And decentering is an important part of mindfulness, and it's that capacity to, you know, view experiences, sensations, thoughts, feelings as transient mental phenomena. So you don't get, you kind of, it hints at this sort of slight distancing from your psychological content, your inner psychological content. And that's important, because the more focused you are inside yourself, the more kind of you are ruminating on your own internal stuff, the less psychological resources, if you will, you have for kind of like connecting to and being aware of the external world. If you're too wrapped up in your own stuff, you're probably not going to take much in of the natural world. One study, interestingly, also found that compared to other psychedelics, the prior motivation to connect with nature was higher among ayahuasca users than other psychedelic users. I was part of another study, and we didn't find this. Actually, in our case, it was mescaline cacti seemed to be more commonly being used with the prior motivation to connect with nature, even if the data didn't sort of reflect that. So, and this is important because, you know, the intentions and motivations that underpin psychedelic usage seem to have a really important effect at sort of predicting the outcomes and things experienced. So it's worth bearing in mind sort of how much, to what degree, this prior motivation may be kind of spilling over into outcomes, or to what degree this connection to nature develops blindly without prior intent or motivation. So this is an interesting study using a Brazilian population. So it was looking at past usage of different drugs and psychedelics, and looking also considering socio-demographic variables, but looking at people's nature relatedness. And this was interesting because it kind of went slightly, it sort of not clashed, but it was a clearly distinct finding to the paper I just kind of alluded to in the previous slide, where essentially we looked at past psychedelic use across the lifespan and people's nature relatedness. So we're doing like a retrospective re-analysis of all these independent data sets to see, you know, what psychedelics have a particular connection to nature relatedness. And obviously limited because we're only looking one way. But in our sample, which was like 3,800 people, 5 independent data sets, only psilocybin emerged as a positive predictor of nature relatedness, and none of the other psychedelics did. We got like a weak relationship for DMT, but psilocybin mushrooms were definitely top of the pile. And compared to this study here, using a Brazilian sample, and it did not find that psilocybin mushrooms were top of the pile. They were number 2, and number 1, top of the pile, was ayahuasca. And it was, so yeah, and only past and current use of ayahuasca was positively associated with nature relatedness. And that's when sort of taking out the other socio-demographic variables out of the mix, essentially. So it seemed that ayahuasca was quite important. And this is interesting to me because it kind of suggests that cultural factors do come into play here. Because if you think about it, ayahuasca is sort of a lot more of a familiar psychoactive plant in Brazil than it is, for instance, in the UK. In the UK, our indigenous psychedelic is psilocybin mushrooms, like the Liberty Cap. You know, whereas ayahuasca is this, you know, interesting but alien, exotic, weird plant to our ecosystem. We're fungus people here in Britain, whether we like it or not. So, I wonder to what degree these cultural perceptions of psychedelics and their familiarity play into these outcomes. So yeah, 2 papers, one of which I'm involved in, which is currently in review, a Never by Jacob Ade, which I think's in prep now, seems to have been in a preprint form for ages, and So our particular study, and I will unpack that more in the next slide, but we essentially are looking at the effect of ayahuasca usage, but in an indigenous Shipibo shaman-led retreat context in Peru. So effectively, the Shipibo shamans are running the show, and my collaborator and his team are there sort of collecting data and letting them sort of like, yeah, not interfering obviously with the shamanic stuff, but letting them sort of do their stuff rather than coming in saying like, you know, and parroting like Western medical knowledge, like we know better than these people who've been using these plants for centuries. There's none of that going on, which is good. This other paper, which was interesting, looked at nature relatedness and nature appreciation, and found that ayahuasca, at least for a month following usage, this was in a Costa Rican ayahuasca retreat ceremony, also Shipibo led. So actually probably quite similar to our context. The only difference between them was ours was in the Peruvian rainforest, theirs was in the Costa Rican rainforest. So I'm sure there are probably other differences as well, but similar retreat length time, also biodiverse, rich environment, Shipibo shaman-led. They were more common, I think, that had more in common than things than they were different. So what was highlighted in this study at the Costa Rican venue was that, interestingly, it wasn't ego dissolution experiences of that were predicting shifts in people's relationships with nature or connection to nature. So this is being reported in a fair few studies, particularly retrospective survey studies that kind of look at large numbers of, you know, internet survey peeps. And yeah, and that it's not alone. It's not the only study of a few recently published ones that have begun to question, you know, maybe the ego dissolution, nature connectedness, pro-environmental behavior change link has been over egged a little bit, and this might be partly reflected of the EDI, the ego dissolution inventory questionnaires, like whether it's actually capturing ego dissolution as you would define it, and even that definition is maybe needs a little bit of careful thought. So yeah, I feel like it might be partly down to some issues perhaps with the aspects of the measure being used, or it could be that the ego dissolution experience is allowing access to these states of unity and interconnection. So if anything, it's kind of like a placeholder, and it's an experiential placeholder for these other experiences and states of consciousness that it makes accessible, essentially. But yeah, awe and mystical experiences were highlighted as important predictors or mechanisms of pro-nature change, both greater appreciation for and connection to nature. Now, awe is quite a sort of like interesting one in the sense that awe's are already been kind of connected to linked to nature connectedness, and it's that sense of being very small in relation to something much bigger. Awe has also, interestingly, being strongly linked to mystical experiences under psychedelics, actually. So these two things may be interwoven to some degree, but experiences of awe in nature have been found to kind of predict nature connectedness. But it goes the other way as well, in that more nature connected people are more likely to encounter states of awe in nature. So awe and nature connectedness have this quite deep two-way interwoven relationship. And this certainly isn't the first bit of research to show a link between mystical experiences and changes in people's relationships with nature. I'm aware of a Finnish study that looked at people's first time mystical experiences under psychedelics and looking at the changes people experience. And one of the most commonly reported changes was positive shifts to people's relationships with nature and the environment. So
Sam, I just want to check in on time, because I know we wanted to do some Q&A as well as Paloma slides. Might this be an okay time to wrap on this slide? I don't know how many more you've got.
Yeah, no, sure. I think, let me just have a look. Oh yeah. Yeah, so okay, I will rapidly draw it to a close. So just
awesome. This is great.
this slide here is linking to the study that's not yet published, conducted in the Peruvian Amazon in the Shipibo shaman-led retreat context. And well, it's not published firstly, so hence the kind of well, there even would be a question mark if it was published, because this was just a pilot study, and there's a number of kind of different effects in the mix here potentially. So we've got the direct pharmacodynamic effects, so the direct drug effects of ayahuasca itself. We know from a few studies that even if you give pure psilocybin to people in lab-like conditions, it can shift their relationships with nature. So we've got the direct drug effects of ayahuasca. We've got the forced digital detox that being at this retreat center entails. No power really, certainly no Wi-Fi, so you've got to get off that damn smartphone for the time you're there. That could have effects. You've got this amazing biodiverse rainforest setting, surely that's going to be sort of in the mix. And then you've got the shamanic context as well, and that's likely to that's quite nature inspired and nature oriented. So we need to hopefully follow up research will kind of start to pick apart and disentangle what these different mediators are kind of bringing to the mix. And just lastly, so a Never paper. Oh no, that's actually the wrong reference on the slide. It's a Never paper by Jacob Ade, and what he and his collaborators found was that ayahuasca can elicit enhancements in aesthetic experiencing, which I found interesting. And no link was made in this paper between this and nature connection, but one of the important pathways to greater nature connection is perceiving and being aware of beauty and aesthetics in nature. So the more aesthetically responsive and sensitive you are anyway, particularly in natural settings, that's going to likely have positive implications for your relationship with nature. So just to quickly wrap it up, nature contact, hugely underutilized, undervalued, overlooked health promoting resource at this time. We know that nature connection predicts the degree to which people actually spend time in nature and value that contact. So potentially by using nature connection, nature relatedness enhancing agents, we can potentially leverage people to take more nature centric lifestyle choices or spend more time in nature. And this is could have hugely beneficial effects, this one sort of shift alone to the individual. And I should say as well that it seems that we don't need psychedelics to bolster, enhance, sustain our connection to nature. They're not essential. You can cultivate that, as I said, through this active, engaged contact with nature and the appreciation and the other feelings that kind of like grow from that. But it seems that while they might not be necessary, there's a growing body of evidence suggests they can help, and they do seem to be fairly kind of reliable agents of interconnection with nature, I would say. I think that kind of wraps me up. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for wrapping so much up. We were being really ambitious in having both of you here.
No, thank you. I'm sorry it went on a bit longer. It wasn't the 10-15 minutes it's
hard. There's so many different, I think, because we're talking interdisciplinary work here, I know we're talking about ecology and I think psychology, and spirituality and systems approaches, I think, as well. And so many questions about the research that you're working on. Can't wait to hear how those research results come out. Paloma, does your slides have any video or sound to it, or was it?
No, don't worry.
Brilliant. Okay, so away we go. Thanks a lot, Paloma.
Right, so I'm gonna share my slides. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yeah, lovely.
All right, perfect. So yeah, David, thanks for having me. And we're going to be talking a little bit about nature connectedness, of course, but then Amazonian perspectivism and ayahuasca. And you all know probably that ayahuasca is a psychedelic brew from the Amazon rainforest, and the word means vine of the souls or vine of the dead. And the brew contains the psychedelic compound DMT and has a long history of use by indigenous peoples in the Amazon basin. And we need to talk a little bit about philosophy in order to really understand what's at stake here. So ontology is the branch of philosophy that refers to the study of being or the study of reality itself. And this is important because different ontological commitments sort of inform how we relate to fundamental questions. So the relationship between our body and our minds, the relationship between our human culture and nature. And these ontological beliefs also influence cultural relations between humans and the surrounding worlds. So how we perceive reality and the ontological sort of commitments that we have about reality informs a lot of very fundamental, essential questions that are important for us today. And some examples of ontology are materialism, which is the basis of scientific inquiry, which is the belief that everything is fundamentally physical. And this implies that for this ontology, the mind can be explained in terms of the body, and consciousness is a product of the brain. A different kind of ontology is idealism, which is the belief that the reality we perceive is a projection of our mind. And for this ontology, the mind is a vehicle for, the body is a vehicle for the mind, and the brain is a vehicle for consciousness. And then we have dualism, which is the belief that reality has both mental and material properties. And in there we have Cartesian dualism, which separated the mind from the body. And it's the belief that reality has both mental and material properties. So when René Descartes sort of divided the mind from the body, it effectively splits another thing. It placed humans as the center, as the thinking being par excellence, and the rest of nature as just passive objects. And this, of course, has some issues, right? We have human exceptionalism, which is anthropocentrism, the idea that our species is the center. We also have a mechanistic view of nature, which is the belief that animals are just complex biological machines, and non-humans are completely devoid of consciousness and reasoning. And of course, we have the domination over nature, which is the cultural and philosophical attitudes that justify human dominion and exploitation of the natural world. So as you see, our ontological, deeply enrooted perceptions about reality influence our relationship, our cultural values towards our surroundings. But there are, of course, other ways, other ontologies, other stances, other views about our surroundings. And another ontological perspective is called animism, which is the belief that everything has a soul, and that non-human entities such as plants and animals are intelligent beings. And the overarching ontology of Amazonian cosmologies is animism. So the basic idea is that Amazonian peoples that live in intense interrelation with other animals and plant species do not see them as passive material entities, but as as people who are endowed with consciousness, with intelligence, and with language. So we have a contrast here, right? So we have on the one hand Cartesian dualism and on the other animism. And the epistemic formula of Cartesian dualism is and I quote, "To know is to objectify. So in order to know nature, one must study it as just pure matter devoid of any consciousness." And in contrast, Amazonian animism developed a different epistemic formula. An object is only a subject insufficiently interpreted. And in order to know, one must subjectify. And this is really interesting, but I can imagine it could be a little bit difficult to grasp. So on the slide, we are seeing a picture made by Colombian artist Jason Castillo. You can check him out on Instagram. He has an amazing page. And on the picture, I want you to notice that we have, yes, two crocodiles, but in the center, we have a human that has the head of a crocodile. And this is meant to be a shaman. So the epistemic formula, to know is to subjectify, or to know is to personify, implies that for Amazonian epistemology, for the Amazonian way of building knowledge, one must take the perspective of the other. One must embody another person's, another animal's perspective. So Amazonian animism is called perspectivism. So in the slide, we are seeing a quote that's made by the artist about this particular image. And as we can read on the slide, in the Malokas, or ceremonial houses of the water world, the spiritual owners of animals live. Caimans are the ones in charge of regulating and caring for places such as the Amazon lakes. And the shamans negotiate with them aspects related with the care of rivers, waters, and in general, the species living there. In Caquetá, the Colombian Amazon, the shamans warn how the Caimans protested against gold mining, saying that their malokas and sacred sites are being affected. So this quote exemplifies different things. So on the one hand, we have a human group, indigenous people in the Amazon rainforest, who believe that animals are people with ecological concerns regarding, for instance, gold mining, that in the lakes and water and bodies of water where they live, there are sacred sites or ceremonial houses, which are expressions of culture. And finally, we see that they believe that they can engage in meaningful dialogue with these non-human people, with animals. And they do it by taking their perspective. So Amazonian shamanism can be defined as the authorization of certain individuals to cross the corporeal barriers between species. And by seeing non-human beings as they see themselves, shamans become capable of playing the role of interlocutors. And this can be interpreted as an art, as a political art, as diplomacy. So what happens is that shamans are the ones who are capable of crossing the barriers between species and administering the relationships between the human world and the world of animals. And they're the ones who are able to engage in dialogue with them, and also to share with the human world the ecological concerns, for instance, of these non-human persons. So in order to know, one must become the other. One must be the object of interest. To know is to personify for Amazonian shamanism and for Amazonian cosmologies. And what's interesting here is that the states of consciousness that ayahuasca induces may have contributed to these animistic feelings of attributing intelligence to plants and animals and nature. And also the experiences with ayahuasca that indigenous peoples might have can also facilitate the transformation or identification with other animals, such as a caiman or a jaguar or a different non-human entity. And the idea that psychedelics can induce animistic feelings has been studied by Sam Gandy, who's here with us today. And basically, the study suggests that it is through the visceral and deeply synesthetic and ego-dissolving experiences that psychedelics induce. Individuals may have transpersonal experiences related with feelings of interconnectedness and biophilia, which is the love of nature. And in this study that I'm citing right now, there were qualitative analysis of reports of Western individuals who during their psychedelic experience could briefly experience reality as a tree or as an eagle or as a river or what have you. And the place where radically embodying the perspective of another being can be seen clearly is in ayahuasca shamanism, and the fundamental symbol for this radical embodying of a different perspective is the concept of becoming jaguar. So the slide is presenting you a picture of an ayahuasca shaman who is embodying the perspective of the jaguar as a symbol of his status and as a symbol of his power and as a symbol of the knowledge he has attained through ayahuasca. So in here we have a different culture, which is Amazonian culture, that relates to nature in a different way, as a nature that's full of consciousness and intelligence and culture, and where in order to know one must radically embody the perspective of the non-human other. And this is in contrast with the Western sort of epistemological ideals, where in order to know, one must objectify everything and everyone and nature as a whole. Amazonian and ayahuasca-related epistemologies are driven by the inverse ideal. One must personify in order to know. One must embody the perspective of the other in order to get to know them. And it is the shaman who is in close contact with embodying different animal and plant perspectives in his road to knowledge. So this, of course, has some implications for nature connectedness, which is the idea that through psychedelic experiences, facilitating briefly inhabiting other perspectives, experiencing reality as a tree, as a river, or as a jaguar, may have an impact on less anthropocentric views for us as a global society. And it's also an invitation to reassess our implicit sort of cultural and ontological commitments that justify exploitation of nature by conceiving it as a homogeneous space full of passive matter. So I wanted to sort of end with the question for the audience: what can we learn from Amazonian ontologies, and what can we learn from our experiences with ayahuasca? Also taking into account that there is no silver bullet, and that our environmental crisis can only be relieved by our own individual and collective and societal efforts to relate to our planet in a different way. What can we learn from different ontologies, and how can we integrate different perspectives in our in the crisis that that we're gonna face and in the future? And yeah, so that's basically it. And here are my references. Go check out Jason Castillo. He's an amazing artist. And I belong to a research group called Poison Medicine or Magic Potion. You can also look us up on Instagram. Yep.
Beautiful. That was, yeah, those are awesome slides. Great presentation. I love the images you were sharing there as well. Gorgeous. And yeah, folks, everyone watching, the video will be uploaded to our YouTube if you want to direct people there. We've got some amazing questions, Sam and Paloma, that I'd love to direct you. I don't know if you can both stick around for a wee bit longer, maybe like 10, 15 minutes after the
Yeah,
time we have advertised. Is that okay? Brilliant. Thanks both. So yeah, if you're able to stick around, everyone watching, we can dive into the questions. I just wanted to share a thought that I had briefly, just talking about what you were sharing, Paloma, having that experience of being, a jaguar or a tree. And when I was reading Way of the Psychonaut by Stan Groff, he was talking about a transpersonal experience he had. I can't remember if it was ketamine or LSD. So interestingly, a human-made compound, and his experience was of being a towel hanging on like a door handle or a rack in the bathroom, and as that towel, it or he was able to look kind of through the bathroom window at what was happening, in the other side of the outside as a towel. And that kind of paranormal activity. I know that's also an area that David Luke specializes in as well. So kind of extraordinary states, non-ordinary states. Yeah, it's there's something amazing about consciousness itself, I think, that we really don't know much of. But yeah, so that was my thought I wanted to share. And loads of really good questions. I think the first one is talking about harm reduction, things like screening and support around the medical, psychological, and spiritual challenges that may arise during ayahuasca use or ceremonies. Anything that folks should know about. Slightly different area, I know, when we're talking about harm reduction, kind of preparation and support, and then integration of the experiences that's perhaps more pertinent towards ayahuasca specifically. Do either of you feel competent to answer that one?
I mean, Paloma might be better placed than me. I mean, I should say I'm not a clinician or a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm an ecologist that does some collaborative observational research, and I'm certainly not personally involved with screening people for psychedelic trials, and I never will be, because it's just not my it's not my educational background. But with that being said, like for instance, Anaya Science, who I collaborate with Simon Ruffle and a few others, they collaborate with the Ayahuasca Foundation, which is Shipibo shaman led. Shipibo group, and they're sort of who we do our work with, and it's the Ayahuasca Foundation themselves that sort of take care of the screening with regard to people, but it tends to be fairly standard as to similar to other psychedelic interventions in terms of background mental health history check, in terms of like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, various things like that. Drug use, any medications, anything like that, it tends to get reported and screened. I think maybe actually my study guys were a bit, we're trying to be a bit more on the ball with that, just in case anything, anyone kind of slip through or anything like that. In terms of spiritual challenges, that's where it gets a little bit murkier. So people can and do have spiritual emergencies as a result of ayahuasca use. It's not always easy. It can be bloody hard work, and sometimes sometimes, to put it honestly, you're not always better off for having had the experience. For an unfortunate minority of people that experience ayahuasca, it can have a deleterious, detrimental effect on people's lives, and we shouldn't sugarcoat this. We need to look at it in a kind of like eat balanced way for all its potential like positives. The guy, what's his name? Jules. What's his surname? Have I forgotten Jules' surnames? There's a guy, Jules. Someone. I know that's not giving away much.
Ecstatic integration.
Yes, ecstatic integration. Jules. Yeah. So Jules. In ecstatic.
I keep thinking of the pianist Jules Holland. There's Jules Evans. I just looked up Jules Evans.
Jules Peck. It's not him. Oh, Jules Evans. Nice.
Yeah.
So Jules is, his kind of area of interest is looking at some of the negative aspects of psychedelic use, particularly spiritual emergencies, as a result of his own life-changing spiritual emergency, dark night of the soul, that he experienced attending an ayahuasca retreat somewhere in South America. So I'm not going to sugarcoat and say that these experiences and challenges don't arise, because they do. And yet, in terms of like what to do about them, that's sort of, we're kind of figuring that out as we go, and we don't have particularly good infrastructure in place yet. I think, you know, speaking, having a connection to a savvy, psychedelically experienced or knowledgeable therapist might be a good start, but there's many different types of therapy kind of out there, so this might be a bit more transpersonal psychology, but therapy. But I'm going to shut up now because I'm definitely like, this is outside my pay grade. I don't know if, Paloma, you've got anything you want to add here?
It is also outside my pay grade. I'm not a clinician at all. But yeah, folks, just be careful. Try to follow the diets. Try to find knowledgeable practitioners. Know that there are phony shamans out there,
Yeah.
so be careful and get your integration. Work with a therapist if any emergency arises, and yeah, be safe out there, folks, because it's not for the faint of heart. It's not an easy journey to undergo, and if any emergency arises, just reach out for help, and yeah, be safe out there.
Yeah, really important. And just on that question of harm reduction, my answer is always yes. Like if anyone says, you know, is harm reduction relevant here? Is preparation, integration important? It's always yes, 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 yes. And you know, ayahuasca, you know, definitely is not a walk in the park, as you're both saying. And I would normally say to someone, well, like, have you tried anything else before? Have you tried cannabis, just for starters? How was that? Have you had experiences of paranoia? You know, what do you like with meditation? What do you like at just being in groups and being around strangers? And then a big piece of the harm reduction is what Paloma was saying around harm reduction is about how well do you know the people you're going to be with? How much have you vetted that retreat center or that shaman? Like, what are you doing the day after? Like, are you going to work? You know, like just that preparation is super important. And we just did an article, actually came out, I think yesterday or today. I'll pop it in the chat. It's really, yeah, very relevant. It's called Gender Challenges in Psychedelic Retreats and Clinical Settings. It's actually by another Vital student, graduate, Jessica Lagarde, who I think you know, Paloma, and she's in the Netherlands as well. So I think you're probably mates, aren't you? I would hope. So I'll pop that in the chat now. So there's another question, maybe Paloma, if I could direct this to you. It's talking about the role of the shaman and shamanism. And maybe we could just talk about kind of shamanic approaches, shamanic skills, kind of shamanic energy work. To what extent is that valid or relevant, particularly to the Western scientific clinical space? And just in a sense, having that more integrative approach, is that potentially part of the direction that we need to go in, or having that option available to have that more kind of shamanic informed approach and methodologies and models?
Yeah, that's a really tricky question. I think we need to address the concept of epistemic justice. So we know that there are ontological sort of approaches to reality that informs the way we construct knowledge about reality. And of course, we're very acquainted with the Western scientific method and ontologies, but then we also are getting acquainted with shamanism and their own ontologies and their own epistemologies, the way they build knowledge. And I think we need to both be very epistemically humble and understand that that's their, like, ayahuasca shamanism and shamanism in Amazonia is its own epistemic bubble, and approach it with humility, and also engage with a lot of indigenous voices, have scientific boards, be sort of be advised by shamans and by elders from communities to try to have a different way of building knowledge about psychedelics and about ayahuasca that's informed by a decolonial approach, so that we don't go there and extract knowledge and have really nice articles published in our names as scientists, and not really engage in a reciprocal relationship with indigenous people who are the stewards of this knowledge. So I think that's what's deeper about the conversation of ayahuasca here, that there are historical wounds between the populations that are in dialogue right now around ayahuasca, and part of understanding ayahuasca and understanding the place of it from which it's coming from, and implies being in a right relationship with indigenous communities living there. So I guess for I think it was Simon, the person who was asking about shamanism, I think the question about epistemic justice is really central there.
Yeah, thank you, Paloma. All right, the next question that we've got is talking around set and setting. And part of this, we could think about particularly folks that are not in nature, that maybe they're in a ketamine clinic, or they're in an urban environment. They haven't had much time around nature. There's not that much perhaps nature in their life. Is there anything from a set and setting perspective that one could do to prime their response to nature relatedness, to make it more likely that even with those limitations on being in a city and working a hard job, say, and not being in a Amazonian environment, if they were, say, using ayahuasca and or other psychedelics, how could we still prime their experience to increase the probability of having a high response of nature relatedness and maybe awe and mystical experience as well? Sam, perhaps you could answer that one.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel so. Firstly, nature-based settings are hugely important for our just basic cognitive functioning well-being. Like being somewhere without any access to nature, even art or photography-based depictions of nature, you're going to be struggling. Your attention's going to be struggling, and your stress levels are probably going to be rising. Like it's hard to emphasize how fundamentally important access to nature-based content is to our well-being and flourishing and cognition, like all the whole caboodle, really. So we should think like having people tripping in settings without any nature, that's the thing that's odd and weird. We've spent our entire existence as a species, all 99.99% of it, inhabiting natural environments. So to sort of like remove us from that and plonk us into these boxes of four walls without anything living, or even anything kind of that depicts the essence of said living things, like that's unusual and weird, and like that I don't think is an appropriate set. And I think there's an actual ethical case for settings that are completely lacking in anything nature-based, particularly for psychedelic experiences, given how sensitive and vulnerable people are in those states of consciousness. And there's many different ways. It could be as simple as including a bit of nature-based photography or art. It could be something as simple as having some nice plants in a room. I'm due to have a call tomorrow with UCLA, because they are planning an outdoor ecological medicine treatment space. So it's a rooftop terrace in UCLA. And we're planning to use biophilic design and plant it out, so it would be a nice outdoor nature-based space. I mean, yes, the traffic of LA and helicopters, I don't know what we'll do about those, but there's good stuff kind of in motion there. And then if you've got big bucks and you want to go all out, if someone gave me a load of money and said, go and set up a psychedelic center somewhere, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go somewhere beautiful, nature rich, with preferably a bit of a mixture of biomes. So forest, coast, I think would be good. I'm flexible on the type of forest, but forest, coast, pretty cool. And then you could build this structure and use biophilic design in its construction. So nature imbues the very structure itself, have nice big lights and ceilings, and then you can kind of titrate the level of nature immersion that the person having an experience or a group of people having experiences might feel they want. And then we can start maybe intentionally from there wielding psychedelics as nature connectedness enhancing agents. So rather than them being the standalone thing, they would be like a supplemental thing that would sort of be part of a kind of nature immersion, wilderness immersion, mindfulness type package, if that makes sense. So there's many different ways we could incorporate holistic gardening therapy practices, like tending a patch of soil before a psychedelic session, planting a seed, which we then take away and nurture as it grows, as we're hopefully nurturing the insights that we've taken back with us. And Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing, nice sort of non-threatening, active mindfulness practice that takes place in nature. So there's really, like, the sky's the limit. There's many different ways that nature can be kind of woven in to how we use psychedelics, both in wellness contexts and for clinical reasons.
Great
Yeah,
answer.
the
Yeah,
other
yeah,
way around,
Paloma.
right? So to help, like, to create spaces where psychedelics do reconnect us to nature, but then to make those experiences integrated with our society, to try to make our society more integrated with our surroundings, with the natural world, because I think that's what's systemic and deeper in our conversation, how the disconnection is leading us to catastrophe, and how we need to wake up from that illusion of disconnection, and reconnect with nature, with our planet. Yeah.
Thank you both. And I really like how forthright you were at the beginning of your answer, Sam, that there is no replacement, alternative, substitute for nature. And I think we have in the West this idea that, oh, it's okay, we can just use tech to solve that, or AI can solve that, or, yeah, we've got this digital version, or it's like, I can fly here. And like, no, there's just no alternative for having a relationship with nature and nature being around you. And then I thought to myself, wow, there's some cool stuff happening, like in Oregon now, because of decriminalization. The war on drugs, in a sense, has disconnected us from nature, because we can't really trip in nature. We have to kind of hide in basements, and so I think with decriminalization and legalization, it's going to be easy to have places like Oregon, going back to Easterlin in California. The University of Madison, Wisconsin's just started building their new campus, which is biophilic and beautiful in nature, to do psychedelic research retreats, training practicums. So this is, I think as the laws change around prohibition, it's going to make nature more accessible to legally just feel safe having psychedelic experiences there.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's a hopeful thing, actually, in the near future, in terms of what we see happening in Oregon's going to be an interesting kind of frontier and sort of experimental like space for these new approaches and ways of using psychedelics that fall outside the kind of more, I would say, strict clinical approach. So yeah, let's see what happens.
All right, so maybe one or two more questions, and then we'll wrap, if that's okay.
Can I just intervene, because there's an interesting one that's been asked. It's not been asked on the question and answer. It's been asked in the chat from Another Sam, and I thought it's an interesting. It just kind of like, and they're all good questions, but this sort of like it peaked in my mind because it's kind of relevant to work that's ongoing now. And Sam has said, as individuals deepen their bond with nature, they may also experience a more acute sense of nature's suffering, such as runaway climate change and mass extinction. The weight of this pain can be overwhelming, making moving towards more nature disconnection as a form of self-care, self-preservation understandable. How to navigate this both at the personal as well as collective level. So yeah, I guess that should be fairly clear to people. It's that thing of like, well, as you become more connected to nature, you're in some sense more sensitive to its ongoing destruction and damage and degradation. So the more, for instance, we know that people who rate higher as being more nature connected are more likely to report eco-anxiety or eco-distress. And that's kind of like, yeah, feelings of like environmental doom that tie to things like biodiversity loss, climate change, these other things. So more nature connected people do tend to be more vulnerable. So it's important to sort of say that it's much more complex than that. Predisposing mental health levels affect how it's kind of influenced. So some people, for instance, who experience eco-anxiety, in fact, many people, it's not a paralyzing, debilitating, overwhelming thing. It can be, but it isn't that for a lot of people, although the paralyzing forms are growing. So for some people, eco-anxiety can actually be a really positive thing, even societally, because it is like nature connectedness. It does predict action. It does galvanize people to take action, both individual and collective. But I'm right now writing a review paper attempting to make a case for psychedelic group therapies combined with group-based nature restoration type activities as one way of addressing problematic or debilitating eco-anxiety. I mean, first, it's important to say eco-anxiety, eco-distress is not a clinical diagnosis. There's nothing wrong with you. If anything, you're ahead of the curve. If anything, it shows your mental health, your self-identity is tied to being part of the wider world, which is healthy. It's our individualized, hyper-individualized society that's got it back to front. So if you're not experiencing any eco-anxiety at all, then you should maybe think about that. But for some unfortunate people, it becomes debilitating, overwhelming. It can lead to more serious clinical diagnoses, so depression, anxiety, insomnia, drug use, even suicide in some cases. So it can be a serious thing. But what I think actually could make psychedelics really helpful here is that they could help allow us, particularly in a group-based context, to grapple with those difficult and complex emotions that come up with eco-anxiety, eco-distress. And these are many: shame, anger, guilt, sadness, fear, apprehension, uncertainty in the unknown. It will vary hugely with the individual and where they're at with their lives and all this stuff. And I feel like, yeah, if we come together and have these kind of shared experiences, it's a potential way of getting dialogue going and being able to share these difficult, complex emotions. And that's part of it. Like, the medicine here is the poison itself, as in to address eco-anxiety, we're not going to sidestep it. And it's very much tied to existential anxiety, or the fear of death, this fear of environmental calamity. And if you think about it, like, we're not just going to stop climate change or biodiversity loss, not without some massive thing that I can't foresee. So it's not a problem we can get around. It's a problem you need to learn to live with, basically, and find peace where you can. And do your bit as an individual or collective without it sort of, bearing it personally, the weight of the world on your shoulders. And I feel like psychedelics, if used in the right way, paired with other things involving group work, nature restoration work, I think they could be helpful actually to people potentially. But who knows? Well, I guess we'll hopefully actually playing some work in Oregon. Oregon will be ground zero for a potential pilot study on this, because it's sort of more accessible, more amenable, and more affordable to do this work.
Thank you, Sam. Paloma, I've got one question in particular to your work, but I just want to share a few other experiences that I'm aware of. Is a lot of folks that use psychedelics do report one of their primary experiences of being, in a sense, the horror of what humanity is doing and has done with colonization, but particularly, with industrialization and climate change and all the war. Like, personally, it's hard to fathom that and to feel that pain and that trauma. And that's, I guess, the going in and through, not denying it, ignoring it, but also not getting overwhelmed by it, but like, okay, this is actually really happening. And I think there's also definitely something to speak about what do I do with this as an integration? And that's why, the work of Joanna Macy and deep ecology, and someone put that in the chat box, is really important here. So if you want to check that out, something like, just activism, doing something in your community or on a policy level, advocacy work, or perhaps just permaculture, like really trying to take responsibility in where you live. And that's part of what we did in our Vital course. We're talking about kind of regenerative capitalism. Bennett Zellner does one of the talks talking about the pollination approach that he has around regenerative economics, regenerative kind of psychedelic ecosystems. And I think, there's just different lessons that we can take from our medicine experiences into the world. Okay, so Paloma, just to take us home, the question I've got for you is about your work. I think that you are going to start doing more and more of in your PhD around contemporary usages of psychedelics. So thinking about, the digital age, kind of urban settings, Western usage, outside of traditional Amazonian settings and stewardship. What's your sense of like what are you seeing? What is it that you are going to be including in your reports about contemporary usages outside of Amazonian settings? And do you have any sense of maybe any beginnings of a best practice ideas that you would have around how to support that, or maybe how to actually not support it? Any different approaches around how it should be compared to how it is being used? Ayahuasca as quite a popularized and I think sensationalized medicine. I think that in some circles is a little bit of a cultural badge to wear. How many times they've drunken. What's your sense of and the question is, what are you noticing now contemporary in the Western model, and any ideas, suggestions around where you think actually we could evolve the Western more urban usage outside of its traditional setting?
That's a really difficult question. It's a conundrum. I think we have a lot to learn from indigenous peoples, and I think we need to be very humble about how we approach ayahuasca. I think contemporary medicalization models are seeking to sort of relate to it as a piece to be extracted and medicalized and give us a sort of pill to help aid with our mental health diseases in the West, without acknowledging the deeper issues here, the deeper issue of just patenting a psychedelic medicine, patenting a clinical model of psychedelics that is based off indigenous knowledge, of having a proper setting, of using music, of using carols, of being connected to nature. Those are things that stem from the indigenous traditional version of ayahuasca use in other psychedelics, and just extracting those models and trying to apply it to the West, and maybe apply it in a way that's not super challenging to the status quo, and challenging to the way we run business, and having political implications to the way we relate to the earth and the way we relate to each other. I think we have a deeper conversation going on about cultural appropriation and about right relationship with the indigenous people living in the Amazon rainforest, but also to the rainforest itself, that's also subjected to extractive economic practices. So taking a look about the contemporary ways we use ayahuasca says a lot about our Western values, using ayahuasca as a badge for ego. That says a lot about our vanity and about our individualism. So I think we really need to take a deep look in the mirror and try to find that proper, right, ethical relationship with ourselves, with each other, and with our surrounding world. And I think that's the journey we're in right now. I don't think there are easy answers to either climate change or how to use psychedelics in a responsible way, or how to be reciprocal with indigenous people in the rainforest. These are all very very complex questions. And I can just hope that we're all in this conversation together, trying to build towards a more livable future for all of us.
Thank you, Paloma. Yeah, me too. I think we all feel that same way. All right, Sam and Paloma, thank you for being here and for staying on a wee bit longer just to answer people's questions. So thanks everyone for being here and for watching the recording which will be on YouTube. And I just want to tell folks, the Vital Psychedelic Conversations covers topics that are really important to humanity. And this is definitely one of them, evolving conversation that both Sam and Paloma are part of as experts that are kind of, crafting and carving out what is happening next, as knowledge seekers and discoverers. So thank you. And yeah, for folks thinking about applying to Vital, starts January 23rd. Applications are now open until January 14th. So go to vitalpsychedelictraining.com. I'd like to ask you both, just to tell folks that are inspired and want to learn more or connect with you, get information about your work, where should they go to find that? Paloma, do you have a good place to direct people to?
Yes, you can visit the website, the Instagram site of my research group, which is called Poison Medicine or Magic Potion on Instagram. There we will be sharing a lot about our research, which focuses on the shifting perceptions of ayahuasca, which I'm focusing on, but also peyote and the coca leaf, all in Latin America. So you can just follow our project there, and yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Paloma. And how about you, Sam? Where would you direct folks to?
Yeah, so I'm at Samwise Gandy on Instagram and Twitter, and yeah, I think I mean I'm not that active on either, but I do share studies and stuff. Yeah, maybe more on my Instagram. I do on the Twitter. Yeah, Twitter, Instagram are probably the best. At Samwise Gandy for both.
Great. Cheers, Sam. And you also said that one of the companies you're with supporting is Onaya. Do you know their website by any chance?
Yes, Anaya Science.
Spell Onaya. Onaya.
Yes, Anaya. Yeah,
Oh, it's like on Aya. Is that where it comes from?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
on ayahuasca.
Yeah, it is. I only just twigged that.
Good marketing there.
So
All
like,
right, we'll put that in our show notes.
I want to be on iOS. Yeah, yeah. No, I hadn't twigged that before. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks. Yeah. Thank you very much. And yeah, really appreciate your work in this field. And so just as final thoughts to everyone, really get a sense of where you're holding around your relationship with nature, and looking around your room, your life, your average day, your average week, and there's no replacement for it. And yeah, we are creating a new future for ourselves. So nature has to be a part of it.
Yeah, no, I totally vibe with that. It's really been really nice to chat with you, Paloma, as well, and encounter you and your work. But yeah, I kind of want to echo what you're saying there, David. Like, yeah, nature connection, as I mentioned, like building, you don't necessarily need psychedelics to bolster, build a relationship connection with nature. It's all about where you put your attention, and nature connection, the foundation of it is an active, engaged sense of encountering nature. It's not passive. It's not about going into nature on your smartphone. It's like getting your senses fully plugged in and engaged. And the more you do that, the more it will benefit you and the more benefits you will get from it. Like, and I know there's lots of stuff vying for attention: computer screens, phone, all the like glittering lights of modern civilization. But like, they're all a kind of very recent facade. Like nature is all out there still. I mean, it is getting concreted and deforested and stuff. But nature as a kind of overarching entity is still there and always will be, with or without us as players or not. But so yeah, it's there to connect to wherever you are, and I'd recommend everyone make the time and prioritize that, because yeah, it's important for you and the wider planet.
Beautiful. All right, perfect place to wrap up. Thank you again, everyone, for watching. And yeah, onwards for your wonderful work, Paloma and Sam. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank
Take
you,
care,
David.
everybody.
Cheers.
You, bye.
Thanks a lot. Take care, Paloma. Thanks, everybody.